Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire drawing process of this hyper-realistic hand drawing using graphite pencils. So let's get started. As always, these are the art supplies I'll be using for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this premium 350 GSM paper by Grupo Coordinates, which was imported from Belgium, and the drawing position area is 25 × 16 inches. Before moving on to the outlining process, let's mask the edges of the drawing paper using a masking tape to prevent graphite from spilling over the borders. I drew the outline using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Okay, so before shading the background, I'm darkening the outline to create a proper separation. Now to fill the background, I will use an 8B graphite powder. If you don't have a graphite powder, then you can make one by following this process I'm about to show you. Paste a piece of sandpaper on a double-sided tape and paste it inside a container you have. Just like this. Now scrape your pencil, and that's how you will be able to collect all the powder inside the container without any mess and waste. I usually make my powders using graphite sticks and refill the kit. But right now I'm just gonna use the pencil leads because they are extremely fine. So it gives better quality powder instead of graphite sticks. And I really need a pitch black background for this specific drawing. Okay, so let's dip our bigger size dry brush into the freshly made powder and start filling the background. Make sure to use circular scribbling motions to avoid patchiness. I'm using a medium sized dry brush in between to shade the nooks and corners easily. Keep on layering the graphite until you achieve the desired darkness. Okay, so let's move on to the hand detailing portion, and I'm starting from this left arm portion. As always, I'm darkening the outline of the thumb first and then shading the arm portion to achieve pitch black shade. I'm using an 8B pencil by keeping the angle very low on it and moving my hand back and forth to achieve desired shadow. As we move towards the right side, I'm adding these slant strokes of variable length by keeping the pressure high on my pencil. And I'm reducing the pressure on my pencil as I move towards the left side to achieve a relatively lighter base layer, just like this. Notice that I'm adding some textural slant lines in between adding base layers to create a required 3D skin texture. When the first layer is done, I'm repeating the similar process of layering a relatively lighter texture along with adding base. Layering lighter and darker textures create differences in tones, giving a drawing more depth and dimension. And when you are satisfied with the amount of texture and darkness of the base, it's time to lock the graphite into its place. And I'm using a 2H pencil and going over the whole area with a very low angle and pressure. This will embed the graphite from the previous layers into its place without making it dull. Along with that, this 2H layer will also fill the empty spots, creating an overall blended look. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outline and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. And a huge shout out to these incredible individuals who backed our channel on Patreon last month. Their generous support enabled me to produce this free tutorial for all of you guys. Okay, so the darker base is done. Now it's time to add the highlights, and I'm using my perfection eraser. I'm adding these slant strokes of random length in between the darker ones. This darker and lighter strokes side by side makes the overall texture look more detailed and natural. As we know that the skin is not uniformly smooth, especially when it has been stretched. So to create such an effect of folds, lighter strokes should be placed right beside the darker ones to create this sense of depth, just like this. This lower left portion of the arm has a subtle and soft texture, So I'm reducing the pressure on my eraser and adding the highlights accordingly. I'm repeating the similar process of adding slant strokes all over this left arm portion to mimic the texture in the reference image. When we look at the reference image, we can see that there are some shiny and bright textural lines as compared to the other highlights. So to mimic such an effect, I'm using my flat tip mono zero eraser and going over some selective areas and highlights. This will immediately make the area pop up even more by making it look 3D and detailed. Okay, so moving on to the thumb portion, and as always I'm darkening the outline so that I can easily work on that specific area without spilling graphite outside it. Now to create a 3D base, I'm shading the area using an 8B pencil. And again I'm using my favorite pressure technique to create a 3D base. I'm applying higher pressure to shade the darker areas which have shadows and then gradually reducing it as I move towards the lighter ones. This will create a gradient that is perfect to create required bumps and irregular surfaces. I'm changing the direction of my pencil while shading and adding a few strokes in between to create the folds texture on the thumb. Carefully examine the reference image and look at how the texture is formed. Locate its direction and then mimic such flow onto the paper, just like this. Okay, so when the basic shading of the base layer is done, it's time to add some texture lines over it, and I'm using my sharp tip 8B pencil. Now I'm shifting towards my 3B pencil and repeating the similar process of adding these small strokes of variable length for the whole upper portion of the thumb. For the lower portion, I'm changing the direction of these strokes so that we can match this texture gradually with the arm portion. Okay, so now to make the base look smooth and even, I'm using my medium-sized draw brush and going over the whole area. Notice that I'm using my small circular motions and applying a light pressure to create a blended look. Okay, so let's start the highlighting process, and I'm using my flat tip mono zero eraser to add this sharp line at the edge. For the softer highlights, I'm using my perfection eraser and adding a mixture of small strokes and blended highlights, just like this. Again switching towards the mono zero eraser and adding these slant strokes after analyzing the reference image. Also notice that the tip of my eraser is round yet pointed to create highlights which are brighter from the center and blended from the outer corners. I'm adding these strokes by varying the pressure on my eraser, and this will help us in getting lighter and darker tones in highlights. You can also see that I'm leaving the darker shaded areas as they are to create a realistic effect. Adding highlights over both the darker and lighter parts will make no difference in tones and will make the area look flat and unrealistic. So it is very important to analyze the reference image every now and then to make sure you are on the right track. I'm repeating the similar process of adding thin strokes of random length over the required portions of the thumb. This right side of the thumb had relatively thicker and brighter strokes, so I'm increasing the pressure on my eraser while working on this area to achieve the desired results. When I move towards the left side, the texture is becoming more intricate and soft, so I'm reducing the pressure and adding these strokes accordingly. Also notice that I'm keeping the direction of these strokes variable depending upon the area I'm working on. I'm sharpening the tip of my eraser and making it round yet pointy for all the areas which need brighter highlights from the center and blended from the edges. And as we move towards the lower part of the thumb, we can see that here the texture is a bit different from the above. So to mimic such a crisscross texture, I'm firstly adding these longer strokes in the direction of the previous texture, now overlapping the second layer of strokes almost perpendicular to the previous ones. And that is how we can easily achieve the required skin texture. I'm going over this whole area again and adding strokes in between and over the previous ones. And this will make the whole area look hyper realistic in no time. Okay, so now it's time to top up these previous highlights with some extra bright ones. And I'm using my electric eraser for this purpose. I'm adding these brighter strokes over the previous ones very carefully. Make sure not to add excessive highlights as it will make the area look one-toned and flat. Okay, so moving on to the upper hand, and as always I've pre-planned all the layers and now I'm darkening and adding textural lines first. and then shading the area with variable pressure to achieve darker and lighter tones respectively. When the required base of blended soft graphite is done, I'm adding small slant strokes and then extending it in the respective direction after analyzing the reference image. I'm also shading the areas which are darker in the reference image in between, adding the texture lines. The portion which is touching the other hand has shadows. So to achieve such darkness, I'm gently going over the whole area using the same 8B pencil but with a very low angle. Also notice that I'm reducing the pressure as I move upwards, and this will help us in achieving a perfect dark gradient without any harsh line or stroke. Just like this. I'm repeating the similar process of adding darker texture and blended base in the knuckles portion as well. The only difference is that the texture of knuckles is in a crisscross form, so I'm adding it accordingly. You can see that I'm shading the area while also adding dark texture lines to create an overall cohesive look. As this upper hand is a bit darker than the lower one, so I'm using my graphite locking technique. I'm using a 2H pencil and going over the whole area with a very low angle and pressure. This layer will add a very light base and effectively embed the graphite into its place without making the layer look dull. When the 3D base is done, it's time to add the highlights, and I'm using my round tip mono zero eraser for this purpose. I'm adding the slant strokes of variable length in between the darker texture. Make sure not to overlap highlights over the darker texture, as it will make the whole area look one-toned and flat. I'm changing the angle on my eraser depending upon the brightness of the strokes I want. If you want softer strokes, keep the pressure and angle low. And if you want a brighter one, then you can increase the pressure and angle to achieve such results. And as we move towards the right side, we can see that the texture here is a bit different. So I'm adding these small random dots and strokes after carefully analyzing the reference image. I'm adding this texture by moving my eraser in circular scribbling motions while keeping the pressure low. And this specific movement will create the required texture, which is not too sharp or too dull. As we move downwards, the texture is becoming thin and soft. So I'm moving my eraser back and forth with a very light pressure. I'm repeating the similar process of adding highlights in between the darker texture using my mono zero eraser for the rest of the knuckles portion. Moving on to the lower hand portion, and the process of adding a base layer is almost the same as I did earlier. I'm using an 8B pencil and adding a base using a variable pressure. Now I'm shifting towards my graphite powder and adding a base layer instead of a pencil. I thought I should show you both methods so that you can decide whichever is convenient for you. By using an 8B powder with a medium-sized dry brush, I'm layering the graphite onto the darker areas. Notice that I'm using circular motions to add this layer, and it will help us in achieving a seamless base without any patchiness. I'm using the extra graphite stuck onto the bristle of the brush to shade the lighter areas as well, just like this. And when the extra graphite is all used, I'm carefully dipping my brush into an 8B powder and picking up a very small amount to shade the lighter areas. If you are not comfortable with shading the lighter areas with an 8B powder, you can also use a lighter grade powder for this purpose. I'm just too lazy for this. I'm layering graphite onto this whole lower hand very carefully. Now shifting towards the bigger size dry brush for the bigger areas, and to blend the whole base we have just added to give a smooth finish. Okay, so now it's time to add the lighter texture which will make the hand look 3D. And for that I'm using a mono zero eraser and adding small slant strokes to achieve thin yet brighter texture. Also notice that I'm keeping the pressure on my eraser variable to achieve brighter and softer strokes. For all the areas which are a bit higher like nerves, I'm applying higher pressure on my pencil to make them appear raised, and then reducing the pressure as I move towards the relatively darker portions. For the more softer and less brighter highlights, I'm shifting towards the sharp tip perfection eraser and continuing adding these slant strokes. And to make this texture a bit detailed and realistic, I'm layering a few mono zero eraser highlights over the previous ones. It will make the whole area look more natural, just like the reference image. I'm going back and forth with my erasers and pencil to add the required light and dark texture. Okay, so moving on to the nerves portion, and I'm adding slightly curved strokes to create an illusion of raised surface. After carefully measuring the thickness of the nerve portion. To pick up the excessive graphite and to add softer highlights, I'm using my perfection eraser with a clean tip. When the lighter texture is done in this small portion, it's time to make the strokes look more 3D and separate from each other. So I'm using my 2H pencil and adding these small thin strokes right beside the lighter ones. It wasn't turning out as saturated as I wanted to, so I shifted towards a B pencil. And look how detailed the texture has started to look. Moving on to the next portion of the hand, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that the texture here is more detailed and defined. So to mimic such an effect, I'm firstly adding a layer of darker texture using a B pencil. I'm carefully adding these lines and strokes just like the texture in the reference image. When the darker layer of texture is done, it's time to add highlights in between these strokes using a mono zero eraser. If the texture is looking too bright, then you can tone it down by dabbing a kneaded eraser over it. Now to make some highlights a bit more defined and shiny, I'm using my sharp tip electric eraser and going over some selective strokes. I'm repeating the similar process for the rest of the portion. But the only difference here is that I'll be switching my mono zero eraser with a perfection eraser whenever I need a softer texture. When the highlights are done, it's time to add the darker strokes right beside the lighter ones so that we can create the required depth and separation between them. This type of layering of lighter and darker strokes right beside each other is very helpful in hyper-realistic drawings. I'm using my B pencil for the lighter strokes and then switch towards 8B pencil for the darker ones later on. For the lower side of the hand, I'm following the similar process of adding darker texture first using a 3B pencil. When the darker texture is done, I'm then layering highlights in between and over the previous strokes using perfection eraser and mono zero eraser respectively. Okay, so moving on to the fingers, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that the pinky and ring fingers are the most detailed among all, as they are in front and light is falling properly, which is making them appear focused and detailed. So I'm adding a base of darker texture using my 3B pencil first. This texture near the top knuckle is a bit crisscrossed, so I'm extending the previous strokes and adding a few more to mimic such an effect. Also notice that I'm changing the direction of these strokes and adding slightly curved ones as I move towards the left side of the finger. For the right side, I'm keeping the pressure on my pencil very low as it is less detailed. Make sure to keep the reference image in front of you either in soft or hard form and keep relating to it while adding such texture for better understanding. Notice that I'm also adding a base layer along with the texture using the same 3B pencil but with a lower pressure. The lower portion of the finger has less detailed skin texture, so I'm just adding a 3D base layer by using a variable pressure. Okay, so moving on to the ring finger, and the detailing here is almost similar to that of the pinky finger. So I'm following the same process and adding a defined texture on the top portion by keeping the pressure high on my pencil. As we move towards the second knuckle, I'm gradually decreasing the pressure on my pencil and adding these strokes carefully. This will help us in creating a perfect gradient of a darker texture fading into a lighter texture, just like this. When the whole 3D base in these two fingers are done, it's time to make the left side of each finger darker. And for this, I'm using my 8B pencil and going over the previous texture. Okay, so let's start the highlighting process, and first of all, I'm dabbing my kneaded eraser over the fingers to tone down the darker texture a little bit. And as we can see that there is a texture of different lighter and darker tones. So this dab will make them blend seamlessly with each other. And it has already started to look a bit 3D. So now it's time to add the highlights, and I'm using my mono zero eraser with a clean tip to add these small lines and strokes. For the softer texture in between the darker texture, I'm using my perfection eraser and adding these small strokes and dots respectively. I'm going over the whole fingers using the mono zero eraser for brighter texture, and then switching in between with a perfection eraser to add a softer texture. Okay, so as the lower portion of the finger doesn't have much detail, so I'm blending the base layer to make sure it looks smooth and even. I'm using a medium-sized toy brush so that I can easily go into nooks and corners without smudging the surrounding portions. After blending, let's add highlights, and I'm using my perfection eraser as these strokes are very soft and subtle, almost blended with the base layer. I'm also adding these small dots on the knuckles in between the highlighting process. And when the base of highlights is done, it's time to make them more crisp and 3D. So I'm using my Mono 0 eraser and carefully going over the previous highlights. For the left side of the knuckle, I'm using my slightly curved strokes using my sharp tip Mono 0 eraser. And also notice that I'm applying very low pressure so that we can achieve thin strokes. For the bottom, I'm firstly adding a base of softer highlights, just like the way I did for the upper portion using a perfection eraser, and then topping up the highlights with a Mono 0 eraser to give them a more 3D look. Okay, so moving on to the ring finger, and first of all, I'm blending the whole finger using a medium-sized toy brush. As the highlights here are very sharp, so I'm using my Mono 0 eraser and adding brighter strokes in between the darker texture. Make sure to change the direction and length of these strokes depending upon the area you're working on. For the lower portion of the finger, the texture is becoming more subtle. So I'm adding a base of highlights using a perfection eraser, and then we'll top up a few of them later on using a Mono 0 eraser, just like the way I did for the pinky finger. Okay, so moving on to the next portion, and as we can see in the reference image that these fingers have very few details and are almost smooth. So firstly, I'm darkening the directional lines using an 8B pencil so that they don't fade away during the shading and highlighting process. Along with darkening the directional lines, I'm also adding a base layer using a variable pressure. I'm repeating the similar process of adding a 3D base for the rest of the fingers. Now moving on to the arm, and firstly I'm darkening the basic outlines and strokes as I always do using an 8B pencil, and then adding a base layer using a pea graphite powder with a medium-sized toy brush. I'm carefully layering it where I need a darker base and using less powder for the lighter areas. When the basic base layer is done, it's time to add a darker texture, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding small slant strokes of variable length using an 8B pencil. I'm also adding a few dots at the starting portion of the strokes to mimic pores and hair texture. Okay, so moving on to the highlighting, and the texture here is almost as bright as the ring finger. So I'm repeating the similar process of adding brighter strokes in between the darker ones using a Mono 0 eraser. Make sure to change the direction of the strokes and add highlights after analyzing the reference image. To add very thin and bright dots and strokes, I'm shifting towards my electric eraser and adding them accordingly. The texture on the knuckle is a bit different from the rest of the finger. There are some brighter highlights right beside these darker strokes, so I'm applying higher pressure on my Mono 0 eraser. And the other area of the knuckle has softer and thinner highlights, so I'm adding them with a very light hand, just like this. For the bottom portion of the finger, I'm repeating the similar process as I did earlier for the ring and pinky finger. Now moving on to the index finger, and it has relatively less details as compared to the rest of the fingers. And the left side is almost pitch black due to the shadow. So I'm only adding these brighter texture on the top right portion of the finger using my Mono 0 eraser. And then for the softer texture, I'm shifting towards the perfection eraser with a clean tip. I'm using variable pressure and adding some defined strokes along with adding blended highlights. If you look at the reference image very closely, you can see there are small teeny tiny dots and strokes over the index finger. So I'm flicking my electric eraser while adding this texture of random sizes to mimic such an effect. And for some softer highlights, I'm using the same electric eraser but without turning it on. But you can also use the Mono 0 eraser for this purpose. Okay, so let's bring fingernails to life, and I'm using my perfection eraser and lightly going over the right side of the nail to pick up the excessive graphite. Then using the same perfection eraser but with a lighter pressure and adding this arc along the lower edge of the nail. It will immediately make it look a bit grown and 3D. I'm using the same eraser to remove the excessive graphite for the tip of the finger and around the nail. Make sure to keep the pressure on the eraser very low so that you can achieve a perfect gradient. As the first layer is done, now it's time to add the second layer using mono zero eraser. And I'm going along the upper edge of the nail and the left side very carefully. The nail is still looking a bit dark with less highlight, so I'm going over it using my clean perfection eraser. To create a separation between the nail and fingertip, I'm adding this small curved stroke at the edge. Now to make highlights even more bright, I'm topping some of them with these small dots and strokes using my electric eraser. I'm going over selective highlights or where required. And look how detailed and hyper-realistic it has started to look. Now to create proper separation between the highlights, I'm adding shadows and darker texture in between the lighter ones. It will make the highlights look more crisp and thin. Now moving on to the arm portion, and I'm repeating the similar process of adding highlights as I did earlier for the left arm. You can place the tip of your eraser on the paper and flick it gradually to add the required texture. Okay, now moving on to the fingernail, and I'm firstly blending the whole thumb and nail portion using a medium-sized dry brush. And then adding the required shadows by keeping the pressure variable using a 2H pencil. As the texture on the nail is quite bright and defined, so I'm using my mono zero eraser and adding these strokes and highlights just like the way I did for the index finger. Moving on to the thumb, and as we know that the thumb has a very prominent fingerprint texture, so I'm adding these curved strokes using a perfection eraser first. Then fine-tuning the previous ones by adding another layer of brighter highlights over them. And this will make the strokes look bright from the center and soft from the edges. And I'm also adding highlights on this left side of the thumb using my erasers. Okay, so for the rest of the fingernails, I'm following the similar process of detailing as I did earlier. And that is how we are done with the main part of the drawing, and now only the background shading is left. So I'm using my 8B graphite powder with a bigger size dry brush and layering it onto the paper to achieve pitch black shade. I'm using circular motions while adding this layer to reduce patchiness. For the areas near the outline, I'm firstly using the medium sized dry brush so that I can go as near as I can. And then using an 8B pencil to fill the empty spots and achieve a crisp outline of the whole drawing. And with this last step, we are done with this hyper-realistic hands drawing. Creating these free tutorials needs a significant amount of time and energy. So if you found this one valuable, please show your support by liking this video. Your support keeps me inspired to bring you more creative content. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.